Hey everybody, my name is Todd Palmer and I'm serving as the moderator today. I'm a University Distinguished Professor of Nuclear Science and Engineering here at OSU. And I have known Marvin Adams for, I believe, about 37 years, which doesn't seem possible given how young I look. I know, it's very hard to believe, but I'm very, very excited to have him here and very excited for him to be the Dean's Distinguished Lecturer today. And so with that, it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage our Kearney Dean of Engineering, Forrest Masters, who's going to introduce Dr. Marvin Adams.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you to all of you who are joining us tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce this year's speaker for the Dean's Distinguished Lecture, Dr. Marvin Adams. Dr. Adams is widely considered the nation's foremost academic expert on stewardship of the nuclear stockpile, spending the bulk of his career in national and international security. Among his many, many senior roles, Dr. Adams was confirmed by the U.S. Senate in April 2022 under the Biden administration as Deputy Director for Defense Programs at the National Nuclear Security Administration, or NNSA. There he was responsible for the programs that design, manufacture, certify, transport, maintain, assess, and dismantle U.S. nuclear weapons. He was also responsible for working with other government agencies on policy and force structure decisions related to the U.S. nuclear deterrence. Prior to his Senate confirmation as Deputy Administrator, Dr. Adams served on a number of review and advisory bodies related to national security, such as the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, or PCAST. And if you don't know that acronym, you need to look it up. This is one of the absolute highest bodies you could be called upon as an engineer to serve on to protect American prosperity. He also served on the National Academy's Committee on International Security and Arms Control and the Predictive Science Panel for Lawrence Livermore and Los Alamos National Laboratories. Now, as an academic, Dr. Adams spent more than 30 years as professor of nuclear engineering at Texas A&M University, more recently returning to the university as a senior advisor in the Nuclear Security Office for the system. Dr. Adams earned his PhD and MS degrees in nuclear engineering from the University of Michigan and a BS degree in nuclear engineering from Mississippi State University. In tonight's lecture, he will discuss a particularly timely topic: the major challenges now facing nuclear deterrence, nonproliferation, and arms control. He will highlight current efforts aimed at addressing them and supporting long-term peace and security. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marvin Adams.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's really the Distinguished Dean's Lecture Series or something. I think I got the words wrong. I'm just the lecturer. He's the distinguished one. So we're going to start with a couple of disclaimers. These are probably obvious when you look at them, but I'm not representing the views of the U.S. government. I'm no longer a government employee. I'm not representing the views of the Texas A&M system or of the laboratories or the Pantex nuclear weapons plant, et cetera. These are my personal views today. Another thing, it's important for me to acknowledge up front, I can't not speak from a U.S. perspective, and I'm going to be talking about global geopolitical events and goings-on, but I'm going to be talking about them from the perspective of a U.S. person who's been involved in U.S. national security for a long time. And I just want to say up front, absolutely, people from other countries will have different perspectives. And that doesn't, they might differ from my perspectives, but they're just as valid as mine. I'm going to give you the bottom line up front. The bottom line is that the world is changing right now in ways that make a lot of unpleasant things more likely than they have been for, I'll say, on average, for the 80 years since the end of World War II. These include conflict between major powers that have nuclear weapons, the possible use of nuclear weapons in a conflict. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right now, I'm standing here and I can't see my slides, all right? Okay, I might have to get my laptop so I can follow along. So if somebody, Todd, it's in the back pocket there. And the angle here is such that I can't read that from here. So I'm going from memory here. I may get the order wrong. But the proliferation of, thank you, of nuclear weapons to other countries, that's one of the things that current events are making potentially more likely. And also, there's the possibility of an arms race, to use a sort of colloquial term. Oh, I got it kind of right, didn't I, in order? Yeah. So in this talk, when I talk about nuclear security, as I'll say in a minute, nuclear security for me is deterrence, nonproliferation, arms control, working together to make the world safer. So the challenge for the nuclear security regime right now is to reduce those likelihoods of those bad things. And the way you do that, I won't read it to you. You can read it. Deterrence is part of this. And I'll say it's very easy to list the things that you want to do to reduce these likelihoods. It's actually very difficult to do them in practice. I want to also acknowledge up front that what I'm talking about today is a difficult, uncomfortable topic. So we're talking about things involving nuclear weapons, right? You probably don't talk about that every day, and you'd rather not have to think about it. I want to go through this also. I'm quite aware that there are a lot of students and early career people in the audience, and I thought I would share with you my own thinking and how I got into this business. I did a lot of soul searching before I decided to spend some of my work life on nuclear deterrence. I read a book called Nuclear Ethics by a guy named Joseph Nye, who I never met him. I read the book in 1986. I never met him until 2025, but I did get to meet him in 2025, and I shared with him that his book had had an impact on me. So when I looked at history and current events in 1986, I did decide that nuclear deterrence had played a major role in avoiding major wars, and that I was benefiting from that, as was the world's population. I recognized that these nuclear weapons were not going to disappear anytime soon, and that if we were going to have them, it would be very important that they fulfill their deterrence mission, but also that we not have accidents involving nuclear weapons. That is, they needed to be safe, that they not fall into the wrong hands. They needed to be secure. They needed to be sufficiently effective and reliable that we didn't have to overbuild them. We needed, in the international community of nations that have these things, we needed crisis stability and other kinds of stability, and so on. We needed to avoid accidental launches. And the question is, how do you achieve all of those things? And my answer for myself was that from the inside. That's where you can be most effective on these things. These things were important to me, and I felt like I couldn't leave that to say, I'm not going to get my hands dirty, somebody else can worry about that. I felt it was worth my time to go in and try to achieve these improvements in the situation, given that we're going to have these nuclear weapons. I mean, really, the reality is that we are. So I've repeated that soul searching every, 10 years or so, and I've always concluded that if I have the opportunity to make a positive difference in these realms that I think are so important, that I should do so. I also recognize reasonable people can come to different conclusions, and they absolutely do, and that is perfectly valid. I'm just telling you the way my logic went. Now, somebody at the reception is going to tell me the flaw in my logic. I'm going to say, oh my God, no. Okay, so some terminology. I won't read the slide to you. Extended deterrence and assurance are related. So extended deterrence is the U.S. saying to its allies and partners, you don't need your own nuclear weapons, we got your back. Assurance is convincing them that we have their back. Yes? Oh, sorry. I did hear. Oh, here's the personal stuff. Read it real fast. 3, 2, 1. Here's the terminology part. That's what I'm going through now. Sorry. Appreciate it, Todd. Yeah, distinguished Professor Todd. So extended deterrence, that's kind of a definition. Assurance is something that you say, how well am I doing this or not? And that's convincing our allies and partners to trust the U.S. nuclear umbrella so that they don't have to develop their own nuclear weapons to assure themselves that their national security is not under threat. So nuclear security is deterrence, assurance, nonproliferation, arms control. For purposes of this talk, it's those things all together. Ideally, they work together and reinforce each other. Then there's this strategic and theater. And it has nothing to do with yield. A lot of people don't understand that. You can have strategic weapons that are low yield and theater weapons that are high yield. It's not about yield, it's about delivery platforms, really, and the distance over which they're delivered. Cool so far? Okay, here's the outline, and we're going to start with this first topic, the U.S. nuclear security goals, strategies, and tools. So I like to start at a very high level. An overarching goal of the U.S. national security apparatus is written in blue there. Achieve U.S. objectives without fighting major wars, all right? Those things, there's a lot to unpack there. So an example of an objective is security and autonomy for ourselves, our allies, and partners. You can avoid war by capitulating, right? You can become a slave nation and avoid war. That's not what we're talking about. We want to preserve our autonomy and so on without fighting major wars. Economic stability, conditions for prosperity, all those things. There's a long list of U.S. Objectives, but the national security goal is to enable the U.S. to achieve those objectives without having to fight major wars. There's a bunch of strategies that go into that, but a key one to avoid war is deterrence. And it would be nice if there were, I guess I'd say, less threatening ways, less dangerous ways to avoid war. But history, the combination of the lessons that history has taught us and the understandably conservative nature of our decision makers who they feel the responsibility to protect U.S. national security, those combinations together say, the best we've figured out how to do is to have deterrence play a major role in this avoidance of major conflict. So there are a lot of tools in the deterrence toolbox. This is not all about imposing cost or being able to oppose cost. One way to deter an attack, here's my favorite example. Wouldn't you love it if our power grid was so hard against attacks that our adversaries would get no benefit from attacking it? They would be deterred from attacking by denial of benefit. What an awesome deterrence strategy. If only, if only we could do that across the board. But we try, and in some realms we're pretty good at that. But in other, ultimately we also have a cost imposition tool in the toolbox. And if you pay attention to what our military and civilian national security officials have said in the U.S. government, decade after decade, these other tools that we have in our deterrence toolbox don't work, unless they are built on the foundation of a credible and effective nuclear deterrent. And that's the way things are structured, like it or not. That's the way things are structured. These things are here probably for a while. You may remember that President Obama in 2009 in Prague announced his goal of getting to zero nuclear weapons, but also in the same speech said he didn't think it would happen in his lifetime. It's a goal. I mentioned this, that these things, these elements of what I'm calling nuclear security, ideally work together and support each other. I'm again not going to read the slide to you. I'll give you a few seconds to look at it. When I was in office, did I get it far enough yet? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you, thank you. My wife out here is going to keep me honest. Todd, the distinguished Professor Todd is going to remind me. Anybody can remind me. Everybody just do this. Okay. So these things work together. And in fact, when I was in office, I was the Deputy Administrator for Defense Programs, which meant I was responsible for the weapons activities. My counterpart, Corey Henderstein at the time, was Deputy Administrator for Nonproliferation. And she and I worked together probably more closely than those office holders had before. But it really made sense to both of us that we were working on two sides of the same problem. And we went around and gave talks together on that, with that message. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got involved here. I started off in nuclear power, 1977. My first nuclear job was at Sequoia Nuclear Plant, 1977. So, do the math, that was more than 48 years ago. 48 years before that, the neutron had not been discovered. So I've been in the business for more than half the business, I like to say, no matter where you start it. So that was at TVA Sequoia Nuclear Plant. From 1982 to 1986, I was in grad school at Michigan. 86 to 92, I went to Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Before I went there, that's when I did that first round of soul searching and decided that, okay, I was going to go work in the nuclear weapons program at a national laboratory. 30 years as a professor. During that time, starting in 2006, I was a member of the JASON Defense Advisory Group, which got me more heavily involved in national security things. And then, as the dean mentioned, I was called on in 2021 to join PCAST and then had to resign a few months later because the Senate confirmed me into this other position. In that position, you see the list of things that I was responsible for. It was really the entire program. When it comes to nuclear weapons, you can't hire Boeing or Lockheed to make your nuclear weapons for you, and that's a good thing. You have to do it yourself, so I was responsible for the manufacturing as well as everything else. And when we say we deliver weapons to the military, we drive them across the country in our own trucks. So I was responsible for the transportation part too. All of this together, by the time I left office, was about $400 million per week of programs that I was responsible for. And since I left office in January of 2025, as you saw earlier, I'm now a senior advisor. I'm a professor emeritus. I retired from the professor thing, but I'm still involved in the Texas A&M Systems Nuclear Security Office and so forth. So how did all of this get started? There's been a lot of activities that have informed me and then positioned me to be a person that would get called on to run the nuclear weapons program. Then one thing led to another. And I'd walk through one door and another one would open, and then another one, and so on, and so forth. And I never saw any of this coming. I didn't predict that this is the way my career would go. But then, again, ultimately on PCAST and and being in charge of the nuclear weapons program. And again, now I continue to work on national security. It's both a passion and a job. So that's how I got into this. This is completely irrelevant, but it's fun, and I thought I'd break things up. While I was still in office, the El Capitan supercomputer was unveiled at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. If you're into computing, you may have heard of El Capitan. When it was unveiled, #1 on the supercomputer list in the world, the most powerful supercomputer ever built. So I was out in my official capacity for the ribbon cutting on January 9th, and I thought it only appropriate to take a piece of prototype hardware, which I'm holding in my hand there, and take it to the top of El Capitan the next day. So that was a work trip. Okay, what I'm about to do is give you a 4-slide summary of 80 years of history, and I won't leave out any detail. But yeah, no, it's a quick summary that's, the message here is that deterrence, working with other things that have been developed since World War II, deterrence has largely been successful. Arms control has largely been successful in the last 80 years. Nonproliferation efforts have largely been successful. So that's the message of this next 4 slides. The first slide here, I need to do a little explaining. It would have been harder without the picture. So what you have here is starting in the year 1600 and coming to the present, in different periods of time, what this graph shows is the percentage of the world population killed per year due to wars. And then over on the right-hand side, there's a bit of a quantitative summary in case you can't read the graph. The next slide, by the way, I'll zoom in on the nuclear era because it looks like 0 practically on this slide compared to everything else, which is one of the points, but we'll zoom in on it and look at it more quantitatively. So before World War I, 1 or 2% every 100 years or so. That's the percentage of the world's population getting killed because of war. This includes disease and famine that were caused directly by the war. It includes military and civilian. In many wars, there are more civilian casualties than military. So that cooks along until World War I, and then OMG, right? We get 1% of the world's population killed in 4 years, 20 million people in only 4 years. The war to end all wars. And the reason there's a significant bump to the right there is, for those of you who may have forgotten it, there was a Russian Revolution going on from 17 till 22, and there was actually some stuff going on in China at the time as well. But 20 million just in World War I, so about 0.5% a year. I mean, 0.25% per year, a little more. You can see that plot goes up to like 0.28% of the world's population killed every year because of war during then. The war to end all wars, except for the next one, which was World War II. And if you thought World War I was bad, now you're at 0.5% per year, 75 million people dead over the course of a 6-year span, 3% of the world's population killed in 6 years in World War II. And, you know, it wasn't like people going to sleep and not waking up. These were not gentle, these are traumatic. This was a super traumatic time. And, you know, I've read a lot of history. I've read a lot about World War II, and it is just awful. It is just awful. I don't want the world to live through that again. Then we come to the nuclear era, and you see the numbers there. Let me zoom in now. So there's my zoom in. Excuse me, the zoom in. All I've done is expand the scale so you can see the smaller numbers. The World War I and World War II graphs, of course, go way up off of the page, right? You're with me on this? So in the nuclear era, up until the year 2000, the percentage of people killed from war was down below historical numbers pretty significantly. But then after about 2000, it dropped even farther. I mean, in some of the years between 2000 and 2020, there were, when people do the counting, like 50,000 people in the world killed from war, compared again back to World War II when it was 10 or 12 million every year for 6 years. There's been an uptick recently because of Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan. There are a few other hot spots around the world. We are now back up to 250,000 per year killed because of war. Be nice if we weren't. It'd be good to get back down to where we were. But now, so the point for me here, though, is yes, there's a lot of bad stuff going on. What's going on in Gaza and Ukraine and Sudan, it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. But the scale of that compared to major power all-out conflict is small. It's good that it's small. It's not good that this stuff is going on, but there's no comparison between what's going on today, as horrible as it is, and what goes on if there's a major conflict between major powers. And I think we should avoid that at all costs. Let's turn to arms control. So the blue mountain here, as we call it in NNSA, this is a record of the U.S. number of nuclear warheads in the stockpile. I don't know anyone who looks at 32,000 and doesn't say, that is absurd. And yes, it was. It was ridiculous. And not only was that a ridiculously high number, but the yield per warhead was very high. The destructive power of that arsenal was, again, I mean, from my perspective here in 2026, ridiculous, ridiculous. The era of arms limitation agreements and treaties began really in 1972 with some talks that ended up with agreements and a series of treaties between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and then between the U.S. and Russia after that. And you see the numbers coming down. And you see them come down dramatically at the end of the Cold War in 1992, but further reductions, some unilateral, and then some in 2010 with the New START Treaty. So continuously from 1972 until February 5th of this year, continuously we had dialogue with either the Soviet Union or Russia, and we had agreements in place, treaties in place, and when a treaty would expire, there might be a gap between the next one, but we were well underway in the conversations to establish the next one. And there are lots of different kinds of treaties: intermediate nuclear forces, anti-ballistic missile, SALT, START, and so on, and SORT. And you see, that did play a role in bringing these numbers down to the last thing that we released when I was in office, which was 3,748 in the stockpile. Now, that era of arms limitation treaties has ended. There are no talks underway today. The prospects for them are dim. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But to date, to this year, I would say arms limitation treaties and discussions and agreements have been successful. But I didn't do it yet. Okay, there you go. Nonproliferation, also I would say mostly successful. The people who followed such things in the 1960s, early 60s would say, oh my gosh, you know, everybody's going to get these things. There's going to be lots and lots of countries with nuclear weapons in the next 10 years. And here we are 66 later, and there are fewer than 10. I had a version of this slide that said 9, and Sig Hecker said, well, you should say fewer than 10 because, you know, Israel doesn't acknowledge. So 8 or 9, I'll say. But wink, wink, everybody agrees that Israel. So allegedly, Israel has nuclear weapons. So this is a non-proliferation success story. The NPT treaty entered into force in 1970, 191 signed on. North Korea was a member but withdrew and now has nuclear weapons. There's a lot that the NPT does for us. So there we are. So that's my 4 slides, 80 years of history. It's a success story. This is what the Securities and Exchange Commission requires brokers to say, right? Oh man. That's not it. That's it. Read the title. So past performance is no guarantee of future results, right? So will deterrence continue to work? Will the nuclear taboo hold? We've gone 80 years without the use of a nuclear weapon. Will we go 80 more? Will weapon stockpiles continue to shrink, or will they grow? Will the number of nuclear weapon states stay below 10, or will it grow? And what's going on in the world today to influence these directions? I want to make a point here before we go into what's going on in the world. I've learned a lot about the details of deterrence in my career. It's been very interesting. It's much more complicated than the view I had, decades ago, which is, well, if you've got enough nuclear weapons to destroy your adversaries' cities, then they're deterred, and it's just that simple. Well, it's not. In the U.S., the U.S. targeting doctrine takes the law of international conflict and so on very seriously, and even when it comes to nuclear weapon deployment, we actually try very hard to minimize civilian casualties. And besides that, our deterrent theory and policy involves more counterforce. So we try to be able to, or hold at risk, a lot of military targets in our adversaries. We don't overtly threaten large civilian populations. That is not what we're about. In fact, we try to avoid that to the extent possible. You saw how the numbers of warheads have come down. What I didn't tell you is the yield per warhead has come way down. The accuracies of our delivery systems have come way down. So we target specific things, not big city busters. That's not what we do. So pull the thread on that. So if your deterrent is to remain credible and effective, then as adversary assets change, as their mix of assets change, then what you need to hold at risk to keep the same level of deterrence will change over time. If their defensive systems change, for example, if your 50-year-old cruise missile can't get through Russian air defenses, how much of a deterrent is that? So you might need to change delivery systems. If you need to change delivery systems, then you'll need to change warheads to fit the delivery systems and so on. So it has to adapt. And it has to adapt on time scale of adversary evolution. So the world we're in today, so keep this in mind when we go forward through the next few slides. In the world we're in today, what we see is a lot of evolution, pretty rapid out there in our potential adversaries. And it follows then that there's a need for the deterrent to adapt on the timescales of those things. So let's see. That's what this is. I forgot to advance again. But hopefully you heard the words. They're mostly here. Message here is, as the world changes, your deterrent force probably needs to change too. There are things about adversary policies that can force changes in deterrence, and we'll talk about that too. So what are some of these developments in the world today that are threatening the continued success of our deterrent, arms control, and nonproliferation efforts? I will take it a country at a time. So developments regarding Russia. Now, I'm not here to say that Russia is bad to do these things. Russia is looking after its national interests. I told you earlier, I'm speaking from a U.S. perspective. These are Russian actions that the U.S., in order for it to, execute its strategy and attain its goals, sees these things and needs to respond to. And we see these things and we say these are threatening the success of the last 80 years. I'm not saying that they're dumb to do this or that they're bad to do this. I'm just saying they're doing this, and we see this as threatening the success of this international system that we've put into place or helped to put into place. So escalate to de-escalate. Here's the scenario, right? Russia gets involved in a war in Europe, a conventional war in Europe, and NATO superiority starts taking hold, and things are going badly for Russia. Russia has a doctrine now that we call, in our words, escalate to de-escalate, and it would go like this, for example. Things are going badly for Russia on the battlefield. They set off very, very low-yield nuclear weapons over a bunch of NATO air bases. Such low yield at such an altitude that there's essentially no civilian casualties. There's no casualties outside the base. The bases are destroyed. The people in them are probably gone. The height of burst is such that there's no fallout. So basically no residual effects. And the message to the West is, this is more important to me than it is to you. Back down. I'm willing to use nuclear weapons. And what are you going to do about it? What is your proportional response in a situation like that? So think that through. And alternatively, or the next step is, what do you do to deter that? Okay. Does a huge nuclear weapon launched from your homeland onto Moscow deter that? Is that a proportional response? Is that one of the options you would take to the president after that? Just think through those sorts of things. So this is a challenge. You've seen military action in Europe, explicit nuclear threats in Europe. They have been, Putin has been not shy about using the nuclear word, talking about the conflict in Ukraine. Again, if you're Russia, you have a conventional inferiority compared to the US and NATO. Of course, you're going to rely more on nuclear weapons, so they are increasing their reliance on nuclear weapons. We did that in the days of the Cold War when we had conventional inferiority in Europe. There's deepened cooperation between Russia and China. There's deepened cooperation between Russia and North Korea. That poses some issues for deterrence. Russia has developed these new novel weapons. So for the nuclear engineers in the audience, can you imagine building a cruise missile that's powered by a nuclear reactor? They've done it. Can you imagine building a torpedo that's powered by a nuclear reactor? They've done it. They've done it. Guess what the range is on something powered by a nuclear reactor? Infinite, right? Is it a good idea? I don't think so, but they've done it. You may have heard, can't remember what year, we had a congressman that made this public, but the U.S. has accused Russia of preparing to deploy a nuclear weapon in space on a satellite. That's a threat to a lot of our national security systems, and it's a deterrence challenge. How do you deter that? Okay, so turning to China, I'm just going to say very quickly, I think everybody's aware the Chinese economy has grown at a rapid pace for a long, long time. It's about the same size as ours now, and it's going to pass us. So that gives them the resources to do an awful lot of things, and they're doing them. That includes a steady increase in their conventional military capabilities. You can look up in the news about maybe some unclassified reporting on war games in Taiwan scenarios, and they don't look good for this side. They look better for the Chinese side. And they've got this very upfront, they're upfront about it. They want to reacquire Taiwan. Aggressive actions in the South China Sea and around Taiwan in the last several years, really aggressive actions by the Chinese. And then the question is now, in this state, and I didn't mention, I guess, a huge expansion in their nuclear weapons numbers. So for many, many years, for decades, China had what they called a minimum deterrent policy. They had 200 or 300 nuclear weapons, and they weren't necessarily all assembled and ready to launch, but would require some time. They decided a few years back that was not consistent with their national security goals, and they've undergone a dramatic and rapid expansion. faster than anything that anybody in the West thought they could do. So they've probably doubled the unclassified estimates are they're up to about 600 now, on their way to 1,000 by 2030 and maybe 1,500 by 2035, which puts them on with rough parity with the US and Russia as far as deployed weapons. So these things present deterrence challenges. DPRK, so North Korea, withdrew from the nonproliferation treaty. They've tested nuclear weapons a few times, including one test that was clearly a 100 kiloton class warhead, but also, just as concerningly, they've had a very aggressive ICBM development program, and they've been very successful with it. They now have ICBMs that can target almost anywhere in the continental United States, and they are capable of delivering actually multiple warheads with that. Just as importantly, perhaps, but it's gone without much notice, and at least in the Western press, from the time of the Korean War until 2024, the North Korean had a long-standing goal, and their policy was reunification. You know, the South Koreans are our brothers. We want to reunify. Of course, they wanted it on their terms, but still reunify and peaceful reunification, ideally. Now they've given up on dealing with the West, and they now are regarding South Korea as a separate state and a hostile foreign state that needs to be aggressively deterred and defeated. That's a significant change that's disturbing, and again makes the deterrence challenge greater than it used to be. So the challenge facing the U.S. now, and this was true when I was in office, and we wrestled with this a lot. I wrestled with this a lot with my Department of Defense colleagues at the time. Simultaneous deterrence of multiple nuclear-armed adversaries. So, for example, you can imagine if something happens in Europe, you know, Russia does something in Europe, the U.S. gets involved in a ground war in Europe, supporting our NATO allies because of Article 5. Does China then view that as hey, this is the time. This is the time to take Taiwan without shots fired, perhaps. You know, what are they going to do? They're tied up. And if anything like that happens, then North Korea is thinking, South Korea is kind of ripe for the taking now. Our conventional forces overwhelm theirs, and the U.S. is too busy to come to their aid. So we have to think through things like that and figure out how to deter things in multiple theaters at once, even if it wasn't a coordinated thing, but it was more of an opportunistic thing. It's real. Okay. On the nonproliferation front, you have to view the North Korea thing as a failure of nonproliferation. So they've got weapons. We wish they didn't. There's essentially no chance for reversal. We talk about denuclearization of the peninsula, but you know, these things are working for them, for their purposes, and there's little chance for reversal. I didn't update the next bullet day by day. You know, there's a lot changing in Iran in the last couple of months, but the bottom line really is, when the dust settles, they've got most of the ingredients to develop and deploy nuclear weapons if they decide to do so. They may decide after what's going on now that it's even more strongly in their national interest. They've got a new supreme leader. I don't know how that's going to go, but one possible outcome is that they come out of this with a hardened resolve that they wouldn't have had to go through what they've been going through if they had nuclear weapons. That could be an outcome. Another possible outcome is they give it up. Don't know. If Iran acquired nuclear weapons, most people believe Saudi Arabia would be right behind them. And then you've got Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all over there, and who's next? Don't know. It's actually more than 75% of South Koreans today believe that South Korea should have their own nuclear weapons. Don't necessarily trust the extended deterrence from the U.S., at least as long as North Korea has theirs. And like I said, there's not much prospect of North Korea not having theirs. Some European leaders have lost confidence in the U.S. nuclear umbrella. I've been in the room with some of them who have told me some things about how they've reacted to statements and actions by the U.S. Within the last 10 years. I don't think about this as much maybe, but global expansion of nuclear power is a possibility now. I'd say it's a more realistic possibility than it has been previously at any time in my nuclear career. So I want you to think about this. If there's capability to enrich uranium to a few percent levels, then you can replumb your centrifuges or whatever your technology is to go up to weapons grade. So if you've got the technology to generate your reactor fuel and it's enriched uranium, then you've got the capability, the latent capability to make weapons material that is highly enriched uranium. In addition, for any reactor design that's out there, the used fuel contains plutonium. The U.S. has publicly said in a variety of reports that any plutonium is weapons usable. All right, you can make a weapon out of plutonium, whether it's weapons grade or reactor grade or whatever. So we've also published nice reports on how to do it. Here's how you do the Purex process in your backyard and separate the plutonium. It's not quite that easy, but used nuclear fuel does contain plutonium, which can be separated and used for weapons. So there's, again, with the nonproliferation treaty, the International Atomic Energy Agency out of the UN in Vienna is responsible for doing a lot of the monitoring and safeguard work to make sure that the people who are using nuclear power are keeping track of all of that fissile material and they're not diverting it, all that stuff. The IAEA is busy right now, and they don't have a lot of resources. And if there's a dramatic nuclear power expansion into other countries that don't currently have inspections and all that stuff, I'm not quite sure how the IAEA will handle it. I want you to think about another thing. In this country, most of our light water reactors were originally licensed for 40 years. And then most of them got life extensions to 60, and a lot of them are going to 80. So if you're lucky, 10 years to build it, 80 years of running it, 10 years to decommission it. You're talking about a century of having that on your soil. How many countries in this world have had stable governments for a century? How many countries in this world have stayed out of conflict for a century at a time? What did we learn? What are we learning from Ukraine about nuclear reactors in conflict zones? So again, this is something that challenges the non-proliferation regimes. In addition, another challenge, I'm going to switch gears now, the non-proliferation treaty. Thank you. The deal between the nuclear weapon states and the non-nuclear weapon states involved, among other things, that the nuclear weapon states would work very hard to reduce reliance on nuclear weapons, reduce numbers, and eventually eliminate their nuclear weapons. And what the non-nuclear states see now is the U.S. modernizing, Russia modernizing and diversifying, China expanding like crazy, and the U.S. talking about expanding the number of deployed weapons to respond to China. And the non-nuclear states are saying, you guys are not fulfilling your obligations. The review conference is, in the next few weeks? I don't know how it's going to go, but I know that there's reason for the non-nuclear weapon states to be unhappy with us. It would be bad if the NPT unraveled. Arms control, I talked about this earlier, so I'm not going to dwell on it here. I would rather leave a lot of time for Q&A. But again, we are without talks, we're without prospects of talks, we're without any kinds of treaties or agreements. The U.S. has also accused Russia and China of violating their their commitments that they have made to abide by the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is not in force, but all of the countries except North Korea, the nuclear powers have agreed to not test nuclear weapons. And the U.S. has now recently accused Russia and China with a lot of detail on China, like the date and the time and the seismic trace, and accusing China of violating this CTBT. So all of that is also a challenge to the arms control regime. I want to call your attention to a document that's out there. These developments that I'm talking about that are concerning didn't just happen overnight. We've seen this coming for a while, so certainly while I was in office, we spent a lot of our time talking about how to respond to these things. Congress saw it coming too and appointed a commission, a bipartisan commission to review the U.S. strategic posture. So if you Google or use your favorite search engine, it just doesn't sound right to say Bing something, but if you Google Strategic Posture Commission 2023, this report will come up. There were 6 members chosen by Democrats, 6 by Republicans, very wide range of positions on the ideological spectrum. I briefed these folks a few times. I talked to the co-chairs, Senator John Kyle and the Honorable Madeleine Creedon, and they told me, you know, she was on the Democrat side, he was on the Republican side, they were the co-chairs. They said, we are going to try to forge a consensus report. I said, you got to be kidding me. You're not going to get those people to agree to anything. Well, every commissioner endorsed 131 findings and 81 recommendations. And that report's out there. I'm not going to read the quote to you, but I'll give you a minute. It basically says, wake up, country. Things have been pretty good, but don't be so complacent. And your adversaries aren't being complacent. Wake up. There's storms coming. Okay, so I've talked about a history of success, good news story, today's challenges. So now what are we doing about it? How do we meet the challenges? I will repeat the bottom line. You know, there's bad stuff happening. We've got our challenges. Here's what nuclear security is supposed to do. Now the question is, what are we doing about it? Well, first I want to say, I don't want to completely depress everyone. I mean, you know, I won't say don't go to the bar tonight, but, you know, I don't want to completely depress you. So deterrence today remains credible and effective. Mostly what we're worried about is what we see coming, and remember, we need to respond. Our deterrent needs to adapt on the time scale of adversary evolution of facts on the ground. So we need to start today. We are, okay. A great deal of work is underway to address potential deterrence gaps, and Congress is on board. So we started a lot of stuff when I was in office that's being accelerated now, both in the NNSA and in the military. The nonproliferation regime is under stress, but fingers crossed it is holding today. I think our allies who are nervous about our nuclear umbrella understand that making that decision to go and try to become a nuclear weapon state would be a big, big deal and take a long time, and it's not trivial. I wish any state that thinks they want nuclear weapons, I wish they would come talk to me, and so I could tell them how hard the safety and security part is. We spend an awful lot of time and treasure on the safety and security part. Believe me, it is not easy to make sure that a weapon won't go off unless it knows it's on its way to a legitimate target and the president has authorized it. It's really hard. We do it. It's really hard. It's hard to make sure that if the plane crashes and your bomb's on board, it doesn't go off. Plane crashes, bombs on board, jet fuel fire, bombs in the middle of jet fuel fire. Doesn't go off. It can't go off. We make sure it doesn't. It's not easy. I wish they'd talk to me. And we've talked about the arms limitation treaties. They're gone. The prospects for new agreements are dim, but that doesn't mean we're going to enter an arms race. It's not inevitable, so stay tuned. There's a lot to do. The world needs good ideas. Looking at early career and student people in the audience, think about this, do your own searching. When I was in Washington, I would usually go on a long run every Saturday, and most of the time I would run through the FDR Memorial. I love that one, right by the tidal basin. Well, I resonate so strongly with this quote, I hate war. So in my view, avoiding war between nuclear-armed major powers is worthy of great effort, no matter how hard the challenge is. So I will offer that thought to those of you who are thinking what you want to do with your careers. It's not for everybody. You have to do your own moral and ethical accounting. But I can tell you that a lot of the issues we're facing could use some fresh thinking. Multipolar deterrence theory is not worked out. There's a lot about understanding adversary motives and thinking that I think we're kind of weak on in government for the most part, and so on and so forth. So I encourage you, if you're at all interested, to explore your options for contributing to solutions to this whole nuclear security challenge. And I think Todd